Hello. The story I'm going to share with you today takes place in the New Territories, Hong Kong. This is one of the three major areas in Hong Kong, covering 86% of its total land area. The New Territories include part of the mainland and over 200 small and large islands. In the Kwai Tung district of the New Territories, there is a new urban area called Kwai Tung. Kwai Tung is known as one of the largest container ports in the world. Inside the Kwai Tung area, there is a residential building called Lee King. It is a 25-story building built in 1975 and is considered one of the earliest buildings constructed in the area. On the third floor of this residential building, there is a secret room known for its association with ghostly legends. No one has been able to live there. There was an elderly woman who moved in, and although she had heard the rumors, she believed that if she didn't do anything wrong, she wouldn't be afraid of ghosts. After moving in, she frequently heard moaning or faint crying sounds in the hallway at night, and her belongings would move by themselves without explanation. Less than a month after moving in, she quickly moved out of the building. After her, 3 large men moved into the same room. Like the elderly woman, they didn't believe in superstitions. However, after moving in, they all experienced indescribable fears at night and also moved out after less than a month. Subsequently, many other people moved into the room, but no one was able to stay for long. The room was abandoned for several years because no one dared to live there. The heavy iron doors sealed off the apartment, causing not only curiosity from passers-by, but also distress for the neighbors on the same floor. Every night, they often heard the sound of footsteps, like high heels clacking through the hallway. The door to the room would also often open on its own, accompanied by the voices of 2 girls coming from inside. Sometimes it was the sound of arguing, and other times it was crying. People often saw shadows moving around the room or in the hallway. After these supernatural events continued, the residents on the 3rd floor gradually moved out of the building. In Hong Kong, where space is limited and the demand for housing is high, the presence of a haunted apartment had a negative impact on the area, particularly this one, which came to be known as Hong Kong's #1 haunted house. The incident also affected the rental market, and to prevent things from getting worse, the local authorities sealed off the apartment with bricks and cement. They explained that the ceiling was to connect with the floor below. However, the explanation wasn't accepted by the residents, as they knew that a tragedy had occurred in the apartment. On May 8, 1984, a Tuesday, the temperature in Hong Kong began to rise. At 8 p.m., a man suddenly broke into apartment 16 on the 3rd floor of Lee King. Inside the apartment were a family of 3. The mother, Yang Hui Kwan, 53, a janitor at a school, and her 2 daughters, Liu Shui Ti, 22, a graduate of the English College in Sim Sha Tsui, who worked as a secretary in a government agency, and Lu Shui Yan, 18, a high school student. The father had unfortunately passed away from illness a year earlier. After his death, the mother and daughters lived together. The eldest daughter, Liu Shui Ti, took on a more important role in supporting the family. A neighbor living on the 13th floor witnessed the man breaking into the apartment of the 3 women. The neighbor stated that on that night, the man held the mother in the hallway and forced the 2 daughters to open the door. The eldest daughter, wanting to save her mother, immediately opened the door. The man then quickly approached, using a knife to attack the youngest daughter, then the mother and the eldest daughter. Before the 2 women could react, they collapsed to the ground. The man then quickly fled the scene. The whole event happened so suddenly that the neighbor had no time to react. He quickly called the police. After receiving the report, the police and medical staff arrived quickly. They took all 3 victims to Princess Margaret Hospital, located 1 kilometer away, for treatment. Upon examination, all 3 victims had multiple stab wounds and ruptured major arteries, with very critical conditions. The 2 daughters were confirmed dead after arriving at the hospital, but the mother was given emergency treatment and survived the critical stage. After the incident, the story quickly spread throughout the local area. In addition to Mr. Chiu, the neighbors also called the police, and many other residents in the same building witnessed the entire event. Based on the clues provided by the public, the police learned that the suspect was slightly overweight and might be the boyfriend of the older daughter, Luan Tuet T. 4 days before, Luan Tuet T had reported an assault by a man, and her mother, fearing the potential consequences, had decided not to pursue the case, so the man was not investigated. The man was someone Luan Tuet T knew well. To understand more about this man, let's rewind a few years before the incident occurred. At that time, Luan Tuet T was a student at the English College in Tien Sa. During that time, she met a classmate named Diep Tu Van, who was the second child in his family and had an older sister. He lived in the Hua Tai urban area, about 11 kilometers away from Luan Tuet T's home. During holidays, Diep Tu Van would invite her to hang out, and gradually they developed a romantic relationship. After graduation, Luan Tuet T worked as a secretary in a government office, while Diep Tu Van joined the Hong Kong police force as a member of the riot control unit. Due to their busy work schedules, they met less frequently, but they stayed in touch and had a good relationship. Diep Tu Van was very obedient to his girlfriend. If she didn't like him smoking, he would quit. If she didn't want him drinking, he would stop drinking. If she didn't approve of him gambling, he would stop. However, the relationship was still not accepted by both families. Diep Tu Van's parents liked Luan Tuet T and wanted their son to marry her as soon as possible. But Luan Tuet T's parents disliked Diep Tu Van. They felt that he was violent and lacked good morals, so they kept opposing their daughter's relationship with him. Later, due to a disciplinary issue, Diep Tu Van was dismissed from the police force. After that, he worked temporarily at a hotel. With more free time, he would drive Luan Tuet T to and from work every day. However, Luan Tuet T's family still did not change their opinion of him. When they learned that Diep Tu Van had been dismissed for breaking police regulations, they became even more distrustful of him. One time, out of suspicion that Luan Tuet T was seeing another man, Diep Tu Van attacked the other person and injured him severely. Initially, Luan Tuet T thought her boyfriend acted that way because he was just too concerned about her, not realizing how serious the situation was. Over time, Diep Tu Van's jealousy and suspicions grew. He started forbidding her from meeting other men. With his extreme behavior and the constant opposition from Luan Tuet T's parents, she began to feel that he was not the right person to marry and started distancing herself from him. In October 1983, Luan Tuet T's father was hospitalized and passed away 5 days later. The only breadwinner of the family was gone, leaving the family devastated. During this time, Diep Tu Van volunteered to organize a group of friends to help with the funeral arrangements. After his help, Luan Tuet T's mother began to change her opinion of him. She started accepting their relationship, and their bond gradually improved. Diep Tu Van continued to drive Luan Tuet T to work every day, and his actions were noticed and appreciated by her mother. To help them get along better, her mother agreed to let Diep Tu Van move in with them. The neighbors also got to know Diep Tu Van and began to see that he was a kind person, affectionately calling him the chubby boy. However, this decision led to a horrifying consequence. Luan Tuet T had a younger sister, Luan Tuet Nhan, who was 4 years younger and still in high school. After Diep Tu Van moved in, Luan Tuet Nhan grew to dislike him. She felt that the house became noisy and it was affecting her studies. 2 months later, in December 1983, when only Luan Tuet Nhan and Diep Tu Van were at home, Diep Tu Van spoke loudly on the phone with friends. The laughter echoed through the door, which she couldn't stand. She entered his room and asked him to speak more quietly. However, Diep Tu Van ignored her and became angry with her. To her shock, he then attacked her face, causing bruises and even breaking her teeth. When her mother and older sister came home and saw what had happened, they immediately called the police. From then on, Diep Tu Van was kicked out of the house. However, Luan Tuet T continued her relationship with him. A few days after the incident, she reconciled with Diep Tu Van and even attended his sister's wedding with her mother and younger sister. Diep Tu Van was later allowed back into the house and lived there freely. However, on May 4th, 1984, an event occurred that revealed the true nature of Diep Tu Van to the Luong family. In the afternoon, the mother received a phone call from Diep Tu Van, informing her that her eldest daughter, Luan Tuet T, had been in an accident and was being rushed to the hospital. The mother was extremely worried and quickly went to the hospital with her youngest daughter. However, upon arrival, they discovered that there was no patient named Luan Tuet T admitted to the hospital that day. It was all part of Diep Tu Van's plan to deceive them. Realizing they had been tricked, they quickly returned home. When they opened the door, They were horrified to find Luan Tuet T lying on the sofa with her upper body exposed, a piece of cloth stuffed in her mouth and her hands tied behind her. Deep Tu Van was sitting on top of her. Upon seeing this, the mother was furious and immediately called the police, shouting at Deep Tu Van to leave the house. He then knelt down begging for forgiveness, explaining that he had intentionally caused a rift between the mother and daughter because he had been arguing with Luan Tuet T. He wanted to be alone with her to resolve the issue, but when they couldn't reach an agreement, he lost control and acted this way. When the police arrived, the mother's attitude completely changed. She was concerned that her daughter's reputation would be damaged if the incident spread, so she claimed it was just a misunderstanding and said they would not pursue the matter further. The police then left. After this incident, the relationship between Diep Tu Van and the Luong family began to deteriorate. The mother even harshly declared that she would never allow her daughter to see him again. Luan Tuet T also decided to break up with him, but Diep Tu Van refused to give up. On May 8, 1984, Diep Tu Van was at his home in the Hua Thai residential area in Sa Dien when he suddenly changed his demeanor. He grabbed a 20-centimeter knife from the kitchen and intended to go out. His parents tried to stop him, but were unsuccessful. At 5:30 p.m., a neighbor at the Lai Kin building on the 3rd floor unexpectedly saw Diep Tu Van kneeling outside apartment number 16, his face soaked with tears, whispering Luan Tuet T's name. After some emotional moments, he repeatedly knelt and begged for forgiveness. After hearing the noise, the neighbors gathered around to see what was happening. That afternoon, only the mother and youngest daughter were at home. They were indifferent to his pleas and even wanted to chase him away. But when they saw Luan Tuet T was about to come home, they decided to wait by the window to prevent her from meeting him. When they saw her on the floor below, preparing to enter the building, they shouted for her not to come home. Luan Tuet T, seeing the worried expressions on her mother and sister's faces, guessed that Diep Tu Van had come to the house again. She immediately turned around and went to a nearby police station to call the police. At 6:30 p.m., escorted by 2 police officers, Luan Tuet T returned home. Diep Tu Van was still kneeling outside apartment number 16, sobbing and telling the officers that he hoped Luan Tuet T and her family would forgive him. When Luan Tuet T entered the house, she loudly declared that she would never forgive him, and if he didn't leave, she would expose his shameful actions to the police. All of this was witnessed by the neighbors. The police officers determined that it was a dispute between a couple and advised Diep Tu Van to leave quickly. Since the police were present, he did not dare to act recklessly. He then left with the police. The Luong family, relieved that the situation was resolved, breathed a sigh of relief. But no one could have predicted that 30 minutes later, when the mother opened the door, she was shocked to find Diep Tu Van had returned. He was still kneeling in the same position. Upon seeing her open the door, he immediately rushed over, hugged her legs and cried, begging for forgiveness. Seeing this, the mother quickly retreated inside and shut the door. She then called Diep Tu Van's parents, asking them to come pick him up. At 7:40 p.m., Diep Tu Van's parents arrived at the door of apartment number 16. They were furious when they saw their son crying and kneeling in front of the door. They repeatedly tried to convince him to stop, but he remained indifferent, even shouting that if he went home, he would die and show his parents. Luan Tuet T, standing near the door, responded, "Even if you die, I won't shed a single tear." After hearing the news, Diep Tu Van was stunned for a moment. A few seconds later, his expression turned fierce. He calmly told his parents that he needed to use the bathroom, then turned and headed toward the stairs. Inside, Mrs. Yang Hui Quan felt that the situation was improving. Seeing that the neighbors outside were still standing and that Diep Tu Van's parents were still there, she didn't want to escalate things further. So she opened the door and pulled his parents outside to talk. She expressed her sadness and hoped they would take their son to see a psychologist. What Mrs. Yang Hui Quan didn't expect was that Diep Tu Van had overheard everything while he was returning from the bathroom. He stood motionless, then looking at the three of them, pulled out a 20-centimeter knife and quickly moved forward, grabbing Mrs. Yang as a hostage. He hugged her and slowly moved toward the door of room number 16 on the 3rd floor, shouting that if the 2 sisters inside didn't open the door, he would immediately kill their mother. Some neighbors witnessing this quickly ran home. Seeing his agitation, Mrs. Yang told her daughter not to open the door. However, Luan Tuat T, desperate to save her mother, quickly opened the door. Deep Tu Van then shoved Mrs. Yang aside and swung the knife toward Luan Tuat T. Her younger sister, who was nearby, rushed to intervene. But Diep Tu Van, like a demon, quickly attacked her face with the knife and slashed her sister's neck. Seeing this, Mrs. Yang also tried to stop him, but was attacked. She managed to run quickly into the kitchen. Deep Tu Van's parents, witnessing the entire scene, froze in fear, unable to act or call for help. Instead, they left the scene in panic and returned home. After committing the crime, Diep Tu Van quickly left the apartment complex. On the road, after receiving calls from various people, police and medical staff quickly arrived at the scene. The authorities discovered that the two daughters of the Luong family had been stabbed multiple times, their necks almost severed. The mother had also been stabbed several times. On the way to the hospital, the two daughters passed away, while the mother was in critical condition. After being rushed to the hospital, she survived after a month of intensive care. At 2 a.m. on May 9, 1984, the police raided the house and arrested Diep Tu Van on suspicion of murder. He made no attempt to resist. Mr. Chung, who lived in apartment 13 across from room 16, was a witness to the entire event and the first to call the police. He testified that Diep Tu Van's parents did nothing to prevent the tragedy. When the incident occurred, they were outside observing. They even borrowed Mr. Chung's phone. But instead of calling the police, they dialed 3 numbers and told the person on the phone that 2 people had died before leaving. Months after the incident, on October 20th, 1984, the case went to trial at the Hong Kong High Court. Diep Tu Van was charged with 2 offenses, murder and serious assault. In court, he only admitted to the assault charge and denied the murder charge. He claimed that the victim, Luan Tuat T, had provoked him, and he lost control of his emotions before committing the murder, stating that it was an accidental crime, not premeditated. After 6 days of trial on October 26, 1984, the jury unanimously convicted Diep Tu Van of both murder charges and sentenced him to death. After the trial, Diep Tu Van was dissatisfied with the verdict and appealed. In 1985, 6 months after the first trial, the second trial was approved by the Hong Kong High Court. A panel of 5 judges re-examined the case. Diep Tu Van denied the murder charge. His defense lawyer focused on the provocation, arguing that Luan Tuat T had told Diep Tu Van, "If you die, I won't shed a tear." This, they argued, was the reason Diep Tu Van became emotionally agitated and committed the murder. The defense claimed that the judge had not reminded the jury of this in the first trial. The second trial pointed out that the judge in the first trial had the authority to decide whether the defendant was provoked when committing the crime, and it was not necessary for the jury to deliberate on this. Furthermore, for a defendant to act impulsively, it must be a sudden and temporary loss of self-control. If he were truly angered by the victim's words, he would have acted immediately, not waited half an hour to go to the bathroom, then return with a knife. The second trial also highlighted that Diep Tu Van had taken his mother hostage, and the crime was premeditated, not impulsive. On March 12, 1985, the case was retried at the Hong Kong High Court, and the appeal was rejected. The original sentence was upheld. After the incident, Mrs. Yang was lucky to survive and moved out of apartment 16. Soon after, rumors spread about haunting events occurring in the apartment. Some residents of the same floor, scared, also moved out. To prevent panic, the housing authority renovated room 16 and the adjacent room into an electrical measurement room. They sealed off the door on the 3rd floor, turning it into a wall. Many people claimed to hear sounds like TV static or dripping water at night, and some even reported hearing the voices of the 2 sisters behind the wall. There were many rumors that the 2 sisters' ghosts had returned to seek revenge and would not leave this world until the murderer had passed away. By early 2012, a resident of the Nike building reported seeing a black shadow pass by a nearby room on the 3rd floor. When he looked inside, no one was there. In June 2014, a pregnant, unmarried woman dressed in hospital clothes sat on the roof of the building with the intent to end her life. Fortunately, she was discovered and stopped in time. In August 2018, a 55-year-old man climbed to the roof and made a reckless decision. When the police and rescue workers arrived, he was already dead. A suicide note was found on his body, and initial investigations suggested the man was suffering from illness and was tired of life. Some people believe that the man's actions were influenced by the ghosts of the two sisters. After many tragic events took place at the Lai Kin complex, apartment 16 on the third floor became Hong Kong's most haunted house. These stories have continued to be passed down until today. As for Diep Tu Van, the murderer, he has not been executed and is still serving his sentence in prison. This concludes today's video. See you in the next one. Goodbye.